What's going on, everybody? John Eric Poli here with My MMA News. And typically when we're doing these interviews, we're talking with fighters either right before a fight or right after a victory. Well, today I guess you could say we're going into left field here. We're going to be talking today with a sports nutritionist. I'm talking to Jaclyn Sklaver, who works with a number of fighters, just recently worked with Jorge Masvidal, and right now she's working with Deontay Wilder as he prepares for his fight with Tyson Fury. Just got announced to the new date for that. Of course, Tyson Fury did test positive for COVID-19. That fight was supposed to be July 24th. That fight is now October 9th. So circle that date on your calendar. Let's bring Jaclyn in here. Jaclyn, how you doing? Thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to be here today.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, no problem at all. So now, before we get into some of the specific work you've done with some fighters and some other athletes, why don't you go ahead and explain to our viewing audience a little bit about your background in nutrition, how you kind of got started working with professional athletes?
Sure. I do functional medicine, sports nutrition. So my degree is in functional medicine nutrition. And in college, I interned down in Atlanta at a place called Ship Smith's Performance System, which specialized in training guys for combine, NFL combine, and pro days. So over the past 5 years, I've trained about 350 to 400 guys for their pro days combine and about 80 NFL players. That also evolved into, this is my first season doing NFL draft combine prep and working with some fighters and also tennis pros as well. South Florida lends itself to a lot of tennis pros down here.
Yeah, I'm actually a closet tennis fan, and I've noticed that too. Even when you see tennis players from other countries too, they always at some point have moved to South Florida to train. So very interested in that as well. But I do want to, I guess, draw your attention right now to Jorge Masvidal. You worked with him for his rematch with Kamaru Usman. Why don't you explain to all of our viewers a little bit about that experience and how you helped him prepare for that fight?
Sure. Yeah. I believe I was probably the first hands-on nutritionist that Jorge has worked with. And something that we did with him is, we had to bring his weight down. I think he was in like the 190s when we started. And so when you start fight camp, obviously there's all that activity that goes on, but also with Jorge, he travels a lot. So I would say that was one of the harder things, is trying to keep somebody on track when they are traveling and they are doing promotional events and things like that. But he's very focused. He's kind of like, once he's in, he is game on and all in. We started working together before he even announced the fight. So once the fight was announced, it was like game on. We actually ended up going plant-based, I would say, about halfway through the time working together. And that's kind of how he likes to hone things in for his fights. But his body's so receptive. I mean, he was such a hardworking athlete that he just dropped the weight right away. And it's not even, I know the fight prior was hard for him, and that was something that was a concern, but that's because he took that fight so quickly. So I think naturally for him, as long as he eats well and he's focused, it's game on for him.
Yeah, and he typically doesn't have like the biggest weight cut in the world. Like you said there, he's about 190 pounds, cutting down to 170. And other fighters do a lot of big water weight cuts too as they get closer to the fight. You mentioned there about how about halfway through you made the adjustment to go into like a plant-based type of a diet. Is that a route that you see fighters have a lot of success with then? Like when they kind of make that transition of cutting out their meats and maybe some more heavier, bulky, fatty foods, that it really makes a big difference in cutting those final few pounds as you get closer to fight night?
To be honest with you, that was a preference for him. For myself, and like you said, some meats do have more fats in them, so it is a good way to cut fat. But I personally prefer not to go plant-based. But it's up to every athlete. I actually work with quite a few plant-based athletes. It's a new thing, so we work with it. So it's not something that I would say is a strategy that I usually implement. But if it makes him feel better, and at the end of the day, it's how does the athlete feel? Because if they feel good, they're going to perform good. And that's the most important part. So we support it. And we just make sure they're getting in all the other nutrients that are needed, the B vitamins for energy metabolism, everything, while they're staying plant-based.
And now when it comes to fighters too, I know we always talk so much about weight cuts, weight cut, but there's a lot of fighters too that they want to bulk up. They're moving up in weight. They're going up to the weight class above them. So what's a diet like for somebody like that when they're trying to bulk up? Do you kind of shove some meat down their throat? Like what's kind of the process as you try to get a fighter to bulk up?
I actually love putting weight on guys. So I'm doing that right now with Deontay. I mean, we've had such great results over the past 7 weeks. So it's just about eating. It's really about eating around the clock. And it is hard for some guys. I mean, listen, the hardest part is that you're training 2-3 times a day. So we have to think about, well, how are we going to eat while we're training all those times? How are we going to get all these calories in? So it's really becomes a timing game, and every athlete's different. So some people are okay. They can eat, drink, whatever, and go and train. And some people really need a decent amount of time to digest their food. So I think the trickiest part of it is, yes, it becomes like a job. It's like a second job for the athlete, but it's really figuring out the timing around their workout so that they can actually get all these calories in and still be efficient in their training.
And I do want to draw your attention now to a few other athletes that you've worked with. We've been talking fighters a little bit here, and you mentioned a little bit in the beginning. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about some of the other athletes that you've worked with? I know you said a lot with football. You mentioned tennis, but you've done NBA, right? Like, who else have you done with some work with?
Yeah, I actually, I just did, this is my first season. I worked a little bit with Excel Management doing their NBA draft prep guys here down in Miami. But my main focus has really been NFL. So over the past 5 years, I've worked with, my guys changed teams. So I had a few guys on the Jets. Then I was really lucky. I had a client who was on the Super Bowl team for the Buccaneers, and I got to be a part of that. So that was great. I've worked with Tyrod Taylor, and that's a great experience as well. And now I've got 2 guys on the Dolphins. So it's, it just depends on where everyone changes. Everyone's always like, what's your favorite team? And I'm like, I don't have a favorite team. I follow my athletes wherever they go. So.
I understand. I want to ask you now, I guess, getting into the football side of things. I imagine when it comes to nutrition for football players, it has to be completely different, right? I'm sure that a running back is probably going to eat different than a defensive tackle. So what are some of the challenges of getting guys ready that play different positions?
What's really interesting is that sometimes the calories almost equate themselves. I mean, there can be a little bit less for your skills guys, but they need to eat so much. And the linemen need to, in season, the linemen need to eat a lot more, but I find in off season, the calories almost equate because the linemen are trying to drop weight and the skills guys are trying to put on weight. So their diet almost becomes similar. But in season, once again, they all need to eat a lot. And so I think it's really just it's just more and more calories for the linemen than it is. But the skills guys, their metabolism's through the roof. So it's almost as hard to keep up with them. I think one of the real areas is hydration and, how much these guys are sweating. And the bigger you are, the more you're going to sweat, right? The more sodium you're going to need, the more nutrients you're going to need to replace what you're using, the more oxidation going on in your body. So.
And now I do want to ask you about the NBA players as well. I know you said you just started working with some of the players as they gotten ready for the NBA draft. Of course, basketball, we see it's a high-paced game for in the pros, 48 minutes. College, of course, 40 minutes, nonstop, running up and down the court. What's like the nutrition like for them as they have to have their body fueled to play such a high-paced game for over a long period of time?
Yeah, you're right. And some of these guys now are playing 40, 45, 54-minute games, right? And it is just like their carbohydrate load, they're once again eating around the clock. And I think the biggest stressor with NBA is the travel. They're playing especially this season, so many games back to back. They're on the road all the time. They don't have that break. So unlike football, which they have, 5 days to kind of recoup, even though they're training, NBA is like back to back to back to back, getting on a plane, flying to a different time zone. So there's all those physical outside stressors that come along with it. So they are eating a decent amount of a lot of carbohydrates, but it's really, once again, trying to use their food for recovery. Like, how fast can we recover so that we can get back out there again?
And it's funny that you brought up recovery. It's going into my next question here now, because we've talked about 3 different sports here. We've talked about fighting. We've talked about NFL players. Now we've talked about basketball players in the NBA. Really, whether it's a professional athlete like that or even just the average person that's trying to get themselves into shape, everybody's working hard, and waking up sore sucks. Nobody likes waking up sore. So what are some of the tips out there, not only like that you're working with professional athletes, but for the average Joe out there, whenever you're training hard, like what are some of the things you want to be putting in your body to not only fuel it, but to recover fast and not wake up sore the next day?
I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. What you're using for your fuel is your carbohydrates is the same thing that we're using for recovery. And we know, especially men and women are a little bit different, but men have about an hour, a half hour period afterwards to replace glycogen, right? The glycogen is the carbohydrates stored in your muscles and in your liver. And once we start to replace that, the sooner we do that, the sooner we can repair. And of course, also protein. So protein is used in our muscles, but it's also used in so many other systems in our body. So when we're sleeping, we're doing DNA repair, red blood cell repair, growth hormone, testosterone, all of that. So it's really, really important that we have enough carbohydrates. So your regular person, they want to do these low carb diets. It just doesn't make sense from a recovery standpoint. It doesn't, and low carb is not what helps people lose weight. It's your calorie balance at the end of the day. So if you're active and say you go to the gym even 1 hour a day, or you have any type of fitness goal, you really need to stick with your carbohydrates, so protein is important, but carbohydrates, they get a bad rap, but they're your best friend.
Hey, carbs can be the enemy too, though, can't they?
I mean, here's where carbs become the enemy. When you're doing foods like that are carbohydrate and fat together, like a donut, right? If you're doing donuts, if you're doing pizza, if you're doing these high processed foods, but if you're doing natural carbohydrates and not packaged foods, you should be good to go.
I understand. And now I want to ask you about some meats too. I know, like you were saying before, when you worked with Jorge Masvidal, he kind of cut meats out as he got later into his program. We're seeing this, and you mentioned this earlier too, a lot more plant-based professional athletes, just plant-based people now in the world. What exactly do you think are the guidelines when it comes to meat? Because it used to be, like, I remember when I was in high school and I was doing track, the big thing was you could eat meat, not red meat. Now it's slowly coming out that maybe not eat any meat at all. So what are kind of the guidelines that you follow when you're trying to help out your athletes?
I mean, at the end of the day, the red meat gets a bad rap because of saturated fat. So we do lean meats, right? And I love bison as one of my favorite meats. I tell people you can incorporate ground bison or bison steaks in because the saturated fat is so much lower. But there's so many nutrients that are coming in from meat as well, not just your iron, zinc. I mean, there's B vitamins. It's almost like, to me, meat is nature's vitamin. I know people don't want to hear that, but now with red meats, we try to work it in, so you don't have, I wouldn't say do red meat every single day, but do high quality red meats and low saturated fat red meats. If you're going to be having a meat in a steakhouse, stay away from, the porterhouses, the prime ribs, the fattier cuts of meat, and try to go towards the leaner cuts of meats.
So let's get into some of these new topics too that have been going on now. The last few years, intermittent fasting and fasted cardio has been taking off. And especially I've noticed, because being in my field where I cover fighters, a lot of fighters are really practicing those, especially when it's time to cut weight. They're making sure that they're getting that fasted cardio in, eating in that 8-hour window. Are those successful? Are those a very good thing to be doing now? Because there are some pushback on it saying that breakfast is such an important meal and that you shouldn't skip it and you shouldn't be eating in that small window like that.
So the science shows us that no matter what you do, it's all calorie balanced. And so there's two things that we know. The intermittent fasting, the way that the advantage to people losing weight is just that they're closing their eating window, so they're eating less calories. Now, especially for women, there could be a negative side to intermittent fasting because it can mess with your cortisol, your stress hormones, and your hormone balance. So we try to keep women away from that. For men, and listen, if it's better for you and you prefer to have a couple meals a day and just have a hard stop at 7 o'clock, fine, but you don't want to train fasted because now what are you using for fuel? Your muscles. You wake up in a fast and you used all your protein in your sleep, and now you're going to go train and your body needs fuel. It's going to use your muscles. So that's kind of counterproductive. And the other one, the other thing you asked me about, you said intermittent fasting and there was, yeah. And so fasted cardio, kind of the same thing. Now, fasted cardio, I'm not as opposed to for some people. What it can do for them, if you're going out for like a 30-minute cardio or something, we do know from the studies that you will burn more fat while you're doing the cardio, but it evens out throughout the rest of the day, and that your body is going to burn less fat throughout the rest of the day. So at the end of the day, it's a wash. So I tell people, if you feel better and it makes you feel good and it kind of pushes your first meal a little bit later, say you wake up really early, you only have so many calories that you can eat, then do it. If it makes you feel better and it's 30 minutes, you're not lifting weights, fine. But the science shows us it doesn't make any difference in the long run as far as burning more fat.
I got you. Now let's end here on a few fight-related notes. One thing, just dealing with fighters in general, before I get into Deontay Wilder here, when you're just dealing with fighters in general, how challenging is that too? Because every fighter has something different going on. You mentioned like Jorge Masvidal has a crazy travel schedule. I know we talked earlier about people moving up in weight, other people having tough weight cuts. Is it challenging to make nutrition plans for fighters as opposed it is to the other sports that we talked about earlier?
Everyone's individual, so it just depends on where their head's at and how focused they are. And it also depends on the team around them, because that's really important. Because the difference with fighters than with working with football players is football players, NBA players, they're on a team. They have a team, right? And they've like hired me on their outside team. But when I'm working with fighters, I am part of a team. So the people that are on that team are so important because we become that network. So that communication, and they're the people with them every day. I'm not with the athlete every day, usually once a week. So I really depend on whether it be the management or the strength coach or sparring coach, whoever it might be. I really need to communicate with them a lot. And that is what really leads us into success. Because, just like any athlete, when a fighter starts fight camp, they're focused. They're going to do what they have to do.
And now let's finally end with talking about Deontay Wilder. I know you can't get into specifics, unfortunately. We do know, again, that the fight has a new date, October 9th. What can you tell us? Like, how did you exactly get involved working with him? What has this process been like? And I know now you guys are kind of getting ready to reset and re-get into fight camp now as the fight's in the fall as opposed to a week from now.
I can say this, we've had an amazing fight camp. We are ready to go, and we will be again. He just gave us more time to be even better. The team around him is amazing. I love working with them. I was so proud of where he was at and where the whole team was at. So we'll definitely do it again. I work with a sports medicine doctor based out of Atlanta, Dr. Elamine, and he is part of Deontay's medical staff. And so he brings me along with his team for some of his athletes, because teamwork is where it all happens. So I've been really blessed to be a part of that team. And, I'm excited. We have a couple weeks off, but I'm excited to get it going again because we saw the potential that he could be at. And so it's just like, wow, you're giving us more time to get even better. That's how I feel,
Definitely. We're really looking forward to seeing that fight. And now, Jaclyn, before you roll out here today, if there's an athlete that's out there watching this right now, they want your help, an average Joe that has questions. Before we came on air, by the way, everybody, Jaclyn was awesome. I was asking her all different questions that she was able to answer. She's fantastic. If somebody wants your help, where do they find you?
Sure. I put a ton of educational stuff on my Instagram, and my Instagram is Athletes Nutrition, it's on my shirt, but it's spelled ATHLEATS Nutrition. So my Instagram's one, my website, athletesnutrition.com. You can reach me there. You can schedule a discovery call. My email's on there. But I always tell people, check out my Instagram because I try to do my best to put out a lot of educational content and keep up with this reels, all this video stuff. I don't know. I'm like a content creator on the side of being a nutritionist.
All right, Jaclyn, thanks again so much for all the time today. A lot of different things going on there. It was nice talking to you, getting the whole different feel of the side between all different sports here, from fighting to basketball to football, tennis, you name it. It was a great conversation. Really appreciate the time. We'll try to have you back on again, too, before the Deontay Wilder-Tyson Fury trilogy again on October 9th. And guys, before I roll out like I always do, please give me a subscribe on this YouTube channel. Just go down below and click the button there. Also, head to my social media accounts too, at John Eric Poli on Instagram and Twitter. And speaking of social media, if you haven't done so yet, MyMMANews, we have great content that comes out every single day of the week. I know you guys are going to our website, but please go to our social media accounts and give us a like and a follow on there as well. We'll see you later, everybody.